Well, it's that time again. It's Thursday. It's possibly the afternoon. I have three beverages, and that means it's time for Crafting SaaS. With me, as always, my co host Shreya.
Hello.
We are the DevRel team over at Courier. We have our inimitable genius engineer, V.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming out. And we often have a partner or other guest on the show, but this week our sort of the person we want to interview is the sometimes furious hive mind of hacker news. So I saw a couple of, what was this? It's 11 week before last. This article called "I only care about the helpful notifications, not the promotional ones." So this article is pretty straightforward, and I don't disagree with this person saying, hey, I'm really struggling with the fact that I'm getting notifications, but they include these promotional notifications.
Yeah.
And they even have, and if we're gonna name and shame anybody here, we're not trying to make anybody feel bad. Also, we're really only going to talk about these very big corporations, right? Like, you all have big marketing policies. I understand it's complicated. I'm not trying to ruin everyone's day or say that you're bad people, but there are these things that sort of, this doesn't feel great, where it's like, hey, even when we do have channels for notifications, it's like, hey, do you want to know when your drink is ready? And do you want us to email you every time we have a promotion and we want to say, like, come buy a peppermint latte? Like, well, that's a little stressful. And this initial author is just like, hey, I don't know a ton about this, but it doesn't seem great. That kicked off this discussion on Hacker News that I felt was really notable, and especially was notable with this issue of, we're out here talking about notifications. Actually, sorry, I've been talking for too long. Shreya, tell me, why, when I work at Courier, do I care about notifications? Let's talk about notifications at Courier.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting conversation to have right now, especially because we are literally a notifications infrastructure, right? We help these apps that are sending you these notifications. We're the ones that have built an API so that they can do that, so that they can send out those notifications. So it's definitely an important point for us to discuss the impact of the type of product that we're building. And I think it's a great place for us to kind of look at this user feedback, talk about some of the features that we have that help the actual users make sure that they have a good experience. And then also talk a little bit about the applications that are sending these notifications. What are the best practices? What are the things that they can look at to make sure those notifications that they're sending are being received positively and are helping their users want to use their apps more, and not necessarily just pushing people away and being like, you know what, I don't want to see another thing from this application, I'm deleting it, or I'm just muting it, or something like that.
Yeah, I'm curious, B, have you recently had an app that you're like, either I'm installing this app or I'm turning off notifications just because I don't trust this, it's not high quality, it doesn't feel good?
Actually, I think this is maybe something that I just need to update in my settings and I haven't checked, but I've been so close to uninstalling Duolingo because they keep telling me how disappointed they are on me for not doing my lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't want to hear it. And I don't know if I enabled those notifications, but every so often it'll nudge me to do a lesson, and I'm just like, clearly I haven't been practicing any languages for quite some time. This is not relevant. Please don't notify me.
Yeah, my relationship to Duolingo I would describe as stormy. And I have both kept doing my Duolingo because of some notifications like, hey, you should go do this. I have also either turned off notifications, uninstalled the app, quit for months at a time based on a single notification that I felt was too much. I was like, I'm never doing it again. That one is, again, the intent is just, hey, come use Duolingo. So that's an interesting one. That'll be kind of a subtlety that we'll get into in a bit. It's like these ones where it's not just a straightforward, like, hey, I didn't want this at all. Right. So let's look at this first comment. And it was interesting to me because I also saw this come up in some of our own posts. We're talking about notifications infrastructure and the technical side of notifications. And then people came right back and they're just like, I hate all notifications, or I really have pretty bad feelings about notifications. Right.
Yeah.
if something is important enough, I can always manually check on it. My attention is too valuable for me to waste on useless notifications.
Yeah, and that
Right?
definitely comes from like a whole history of constantly being given messages that you just don't care about. And you just, like if you see something you don't care about once, it's fine. You see it like 20 times in 1 week, and then you're like, you know what? I don't want to see anything anymore.
Yeah, yeah. It's a real feeling of like, hey, my time is just too valuable, and almost like I'm honoring myself and my time to the extent that I'm not going to waste it on this. And
Yeah.
I know some people who they struggle with like email and email subscriptions, and I could do this the same way. It's like I know how to not get this email, right? But there's something I'm having trouble like valuing my time enough, right? There's two here that really stand out to me as like subtleties of this frustration. Like I understand that, hey, I picked up my phone because it chimed and it was just someone offering me free pizza on my birthday and I'm traveling right now. It's like, okay, this feels way off base. And also I don't like getting a marketing message. Okay, sure. But then here are a couple that really, really spoke to me too. One is like my bank telling me I'm getting a discount at the supermarket, which I get a bit of too, which is like, it's like, hey, get a discount on Piggly Wiggly today. I'm like, oh, well, there's not even a Piggly Wiggly near me, right? I really didn't care for that, right? I noticed I get pizza promotional ones. I already ordered pizza once today, right? I no, I'm not. It's at 5 p.m. I ordered pizza. I'm not ordering a pizza again at 7 p.m. from the same app. Please stop. And then another one. Oops, I don't know what I just did. I'm gonna turn this off for a sec while I find this again. Another person
Yeah.
complained, "Hey, I have some configuration available, but it's like gives me a whole lot of options, and then I don't really know, what I'm getting." I've seen this before, where it's like, "Do you want profile updates or do you want account updates?"
It's not only that they have a lot of options though, like I've seen, yeah, they'll have like 20, like a whole list of things. None of them are clear. Like you don't actually know what it means if you're turning a specific notification on or off.
Yeah.
And also you have to like manually often like go through the entire list. It's not like a select all or like remove all or something like that, which is really frustrating.
So before we dive into some of the solutions, I want to pay the bills for a minute and just remind everybody that if you go to app.courier.com and sign up, and there'll be a link at the top of our description down below, that's the best way to like try Courier for, one of our initial things is definitely just making, especially setting multi-channel notifications easier for engineers. But okay, so let's get on to our actual stuff we're talking about today, which is, I was talking about all this at our little like rehearsal. And B was like, okay, but what are we going to do about this? Like, what's the solve, right? And you came up with quite a theme for this, which I really liked.
Yeah, so I think the solve for this is like making sure that you instill trust in your customers. And you want to make sure that you instill trust by being respectful of their time. So one thing I would say is like, don't mass send notifications. Like your notifications that you send to your customer should never come as a surprise. They should always be super relevant to the content they're used to receiving from you. Like if you're a bank and you're sending me notifications about free pizza, it doesn't feel relevant. It feels like now you're being a little dishonest and you're trying to market to me something that is not a core use case for your product.
Yeah, so it started. Oh, I did some weird capitalization here because I don't know. You think I spoke German, but I trust in capital letters. I'm gonna edit it because I don't feel embarrassed about that. But that that notifications are this relationship of trust, right? That it's not just, this is just a thing like, hey, you changed the color of a banner and I'm upset. Where it's like, yeah, I want to make that better for you. I want to make the design better, but when we send notifications, there is this trust relationship that happens, right? And it's more related to like stealing your data, how your data is shared. It's more like this like trust-based stuff than it is like a normal kind of user experience thing where it's like, yes, it's not great if a button is in the wrong place, but if I get a notification that feels way off base, I kind of feel something a lot more stronger than, oh, hey, it was hard to figure out this menu. Right? Or, oh, I didn't notice I had that option down here. You feel a little bit more like betrayed. Yeah. And so you're getting into one of the first ones, which is, and again, we'll share some graphics, I think, on Twitter in the week to follow, is like, what are some of the key elements of that trust? And one of the ones is that started it out was like, hey, like, notifications need to feel, relevant to me, right? But if it's like, hey, this is a store I don't go to, or this is a thing I just, am not going to do, it's like, well, that doesn't feel right at all, right? And then you even mentioned the second one, which is about them feeling like expected to come from this person, right? So if it's like, hey, I have, the Torrid app on my phone, I want to hear when there's a sale on jackets, because that's where I buy my, my power blazers. If it's like some message about, hey, do you want to buy cosmetics? It's like, hey, that's not what you sell there. That's not that. It's weird that you're sending me this, right? And that part feels like, hey, I want to get sort of the stuff that I would expect from you.
Yes, I think that one way to think about it, like as an engineer, when you are designing things, you have to, like an API, you have to think about it as a contract between you and your end users. That is a contract that you must respect. I think you should also think about notifications in some way as like a contract with your end users. Like you respect them enough to not waste their time, and you're not going to waste their time by making sure that your notifications are personalized to them.
Yeah, I'm numbering these, but it's really probably not going to come out quite like this at the end. But something about how, yeah, like notifications are a contract just like an API contract, right? And so when I receive something really unexpected there, the response is often similar, right? Where it's like, one of the reasons APIs are often very well documented and very well held to is that we don't want to lose that partner developer, right? So if we start messing with that contract, we start to be like, I'm not going to do this anymore because I get unexpected results every time I make a request, right? So the same with notifications, that once we start doing that, it's much more like we've broken those contract of expectations, sort of out of the emotional side and just sort of the straightforward side of like, yeah, hey, that's not what we expected.
Exactly.
Shreya, what's another one that we had talked about as like stuff that we think people are going to expect when they're thinking about notifications?
I think one of the things, and we like started briefly talking about this, but how much control an application gives you when it comes to what type of notifications you get. And obviously, like you mentioned, it's a relationship, right? It has to go both ways. If it is just like an application bombarding you with messages, that's not a two-way relationship, and that's going to end like cause a lot of dead ends. I did have a real quick question though on all of these things that we're talking about from a developer's perspective. Is it the developer who's responsible for making these decisions, or who would be the person that would decide?
I hate to say this, but that kind of feels like, in some regards, a product question. If you're designing a product and you want to send your users notifications, you have to think about what scope that lies in. So I feel like that's a product question, but I do think that it's up to the engineers that are designing, like it's up to us, like at Courier, because we are designing notification infrastructure. It's up to us to make sure that we give you all the features you need to allow you to customize notifications you send to your end users, and allow them to unsubscribe. So one other thing that this brought to my mind is that, like, I think it's like, it's really, really, really a shame when you get a notification and there's no way to unsubscribe from it.
Yeah. And in fact, my idea for a hackathon this next week was that, think about, could we make it like just like a checkbox about when you send out a notification with Courier to be like, include an unsubscribe link, right? That like goes to an endpoint on our side to unsubscribe people. Just an interesting idea. I don't, like it'll complicated to implement, but this I think actually gets us to one thing. It's like probably the decision of like what notification channels you're going to make available, how and certainly how and when you actually are going to use those channels. Right, that is like a product side, or even possibly like user experience or marketing decision is like what's going out. But let's talk about the developer side of this, because this is where, of course, because we work in this, we want to have this conversation. But I also think that technology can help here. And that's interesting because, of course, on the face of it, like helping people send more notifications on more channels, you almost like, oh, that seems like it might make it worse, right? Like, I don't want to just be blasting out more stuff. And Courier's not an email blast tool, send to 50 million people and it's just one button. It's much more about the ability to send the right notification at the right time, right? And on the right channel and with the right automations attached to it, so that it can be more targeted. Because having worked in user experience and having worked in like marketing to existing customers, which is certainly largely a DevRel responsibility, one of the things that you'd find is you say, hey, I want to tell people about this. Let's say I have a new feature. I want to make sure people know about it. And then you'd say, okay, I want to message people about this. And then now here is where a developer can really change the map, because inevitably big companies, small companies, really agile ones, really ones that were really slow to make changes, we could never be as nicely targeted as I wish we could be, right? I would come back and say, hey, I only want to message people who have an existing account, whose licensing allows them to use this feature, and who haven't used the feature yet, right? Three sibs that I want to apply to this, and I want to notify those people. And I never had somebody come back and be like, yeah, that's easy. Just tick these 3 boxes. And then when you message, it'll go to these people. So I was always having to write emails or what have you that were like, hey, if you've already used this, then remember that. If you haven't used it, that, just I had to make it more general. And I knew that some of the people we were notifying, right, this just didn't affect them. Like they weren't even using it. They didn't even have this feature license, so they were not gonna. This is totally and I just had to sort of put in a caveat at the top to say that. So, if as developers we can create an ability to give like product people, user experience people a little more access and control into how things are being targeted, then it's much easier to ensure that you're actually getting notifications that are better, like more relevant to you and actually make sense for you. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like some of the other stuff that Courier can help like solve about these problems.
Yeah, you actually brought up a really good point, Nika. And what you were saying is that, like, imagine someone has never used this feature or they don't have this thing readily available to them, but you're marketing to them anyway and it's not relevant. So some of the things that we do inside of our product to make sure that you can target like a specific group of people is called an audience. An audience, you can really think about that as like a user segment. So what you can do is you can say send to users that reside in, this area, or send to users that did not respond to the last message, or send to users that have not clicked. Like you have fine-grained conditionals inside of your template as well to say, like, if user has this feature, send them a notification. If they do not, then do not send us notification. And there are many ways you could do this with our product. So that's through our template conditionals. That's going to be through our audiences API. And then you can also accomplish this with like an automation as well. But what I would say is that like what you probably are looking for is an audience or a conditional inside of your notification template.
Yeah, and so audiences, I know, Shrey, these are like a pretty powerful tool for being able to do things like, hey, has this person used this feature already? Do they have these feature flags on? It's very easy to set up an audience to say, hey, I'm going to speak directly to those people.
Yeah, exactly. And like from the perspective of the person receiving the notification, everything that both of you have already said is like, it's so much better to get messages when you know that this is something that the application that's sending it knows you want to see. You know what I mean? There's like, okay, yeah, they thought about me before they sent this. They're not just like randomly picking me out of thousands of people and just, shipping it out to everyone else. And I also want to like continue on this train of thought of like what an experience is like for a user. From a developer's experience, not building those notifications and not sending them out, but actually receiving notifications. V, has there ever been like a situation where you feel like you've been bombarded with messages or things that you don't really need to see or want to see? And how has your experience been like there?
Absolutely. So I think that a lot of engineers can really relate to being on call. And on call is like when you basically have to make sure the system and the product is up and running after hours, after work hours. So most engineers in their lifetime will go on call. And when you go on call, it like the way that you have things set up can make or break your job in some way. Like you could either love it or you could hate it. And like the ways that you make on call really like okay for engineers is that you don't have a bunch of like a bunch of noise in your logs. So imagine you have it, and your API is throwing an error, and it's throwing that error 1,000 times. But that's an error that you've already acknowledged. Someone has an incoming fix for it, and it's slated. It's going to feel like too much noise, and you're not going to be able to triage when something is actually on fire, because everything's going to get buried behind these 1,000 errors that are not really relevant to whether the system is performing to the way it should be. So I think that you have to be really cognizant with what kind of errors that you set up, what kind of monitors you have set up, what kind of things that you want to alert your engineers for. So I think that this is completely analogous to being on call as an engineer. Too much noise is awful, and you can actually have outages because, like, I've been at places where we were like, well, why didn't we see this happening? And it was like, oh, well, we just thought that it was another red herring in logs. So we didn't really escalate it to the level that we needed to. And now, stuff is on fire.
Yeah, I've absolutely seen, stuff where, hey, because we were logging it, it feels like, oh, well, that's good. But then it is just part of so much. Or like, I'll see like these unit tests. You'll go to these environments where it's like, hey, these 200 unit tests always fail. So they like are literally looking to be like, oh, did 201 unit tests fail? Oh, that's a problem. We got to fix that, right? It's like that's not a good situation where you're just way over bombarded with this stuff, and it's so frequent that you have alert fatigue, where you now a new alert is just something that you ignore by default, which is obviously not a good place to be.
So what I would recommend and what I would say about this is that, like, and this is like the culture that we have at Courier, every error message that comes through at PagerDuty, we treat that as if that is a high alert. Like, every 500 in your application should signify that something is legitimately on fire. Otherwise, you should not be throwing a 500.
Oh, this gets me to an interesting dog fooding question, which is it possible, do you think, I mean, of course you could add yourself to every audience, but like, one thing that would be interesting is to see like, hey, send me every bulk notification that we are sending, right? Like, it would be interesting to say like, hey, somebody's got to be carrying around a phone for our service that is like getting all of these notifications, right? So like that you're experiencing a little bit like what your users experience. So if you have some B2B product and it's like you're sending notifications to users to be like, hey, it's Thursday morning and this is the stuff to be aware of, it's like, make sure that your phone is buzzing too, right? Like, back when I worked in, like again, like user experience, I had that. I would always have like a demo account or something set up so that I saw every email that went out and every push notification that went out from our app. And I think we might even add it to the list as like, yeah, that's something you should be doing, is like, if you're kind of not aware of that, then you may not see that. Task tracking software, which shall not be named, would email you every morning, here are the tasks that you haven't finished and you like need to work on, including Saturday and Sunday morning. And when I finally got it together, it was like I was like a side contract. It was not a big focus. I mean, I wasn't in there every day, but I really didn't like getting these like Sunday morning pings like, you have these things to do, right? And when I went to go in and change the settings, they're like, oh, do you want no emails at all? That was the only setting available. I was like, oh, if your whole team is getting these Sunday morning notifications, I weep for you. But I think you're not. I don't think you realize that you're sending this to users and how unpleasant this is.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because it's up to whoever designed that application to ensure that you can have something during working hours. Like, when you go ahead and you have like in Gmail, you can set what your working hours are when you're scheduling a meeting. So I feel like you should be able to have like the same sort of etiquette in any application. That's actually a really interesting take on something that we could be working on in the future. Like, maybe you go on vacation or something and you don't want any notifications when you're on vacation. Same way you could do that in Slack, where you can pause notifications. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there.
I was going to say, Slack does such a good job of like connecting to Google Calendar and just knowing what your schedule is like and just making sure you don't even have to think about it.
Yeah. I think we could, not we as Courier, but I think that like everyone in general could learn a lot about how you can send notifications in a respectful way through Slack. Like you can set an away status, you can snooze things, you can like remind yourself. Like it really thinks about like your overall experience as a user and like how do they deliver things to you in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, one that came up a couple times in this Hacker News thread is that even the changing of these settings can be very obscure in some cases, right? Where like Lyft is one example where it's like privacy, choose what data you share with us. That's where you say, hey, don't notify me about sales.
That's
Like
so weird.
don't notify me that my driver's on my way. Just notify me, whatever it is. It's like, oh my gosh, like that sort of would want that in a different place. And yeah, Slack does an amazing job of like when sending you like an out of business hours notification, like often includes with it, like, hey, do you want to keep getting these? Right. And then obviously, if for better or for worse, like offers like, hey, do you want to send a notification to this person? It's a weird time. Recently implemented a year and a half ago, like, by the way, it's 4 a.m. for this person. Right. So even if they haven't set any notifications, I don't know quite what the cutoff is, but it just reminds you like, hey, it's a weird time for this person. So think about that when you're sending your message.
Yeah. And I think that some things that we offer, like another thing is that like with automations, you can essentially delay when you're going to send a message. You can schedule a message. So that's one of the ways where we try to be respectful of our users. Like we give you a way for you to say, let's send out our weekly digest at like 9 a.m. Maybe don't send your weekly digest at 2 a.m. when no one's up and reading it. Or maybe send it based on that person's time zone. And we give you that flexibility too. You can use an audience inside of an automation.
Yeah, and there was a really cool discussion last week about how we implement those automations and how we implement them to be very, very close for the time that they're supposed to be sent. Previously, this has been implemented with like a time to life setting. It's like, hey, when when it goes over the time to life, then go ahead and send the notification at that time, which worked fine and is totally the kind of thing I would implement if someone asked me to do this system because I was part of a single company's notifications team. Of course, it wasn't terribly exact, right? So like, could be a few minutes off, could be a few hours off, right? And that's probably fine. That's probably fine for that for some things, which is like, hey, by the way, Mother's Day is coming up. Let me know if you want to get a bouquet of flowers, right? Like, okay, it came in at 3 p.m., came in at 5 p.m., But if your product grows and your needs grow and you want to send people the notifications, it's like, hey, our live stream is starting right now, and we're handing out these codes that you all wanted so much for the last 6 weeks, at the start of this live stream. Well, if that notification shows up an hour late, right, then like live stream's over. It's just not a satisfying experience. So one of the really nice things about using a SaaS tool for this is that you get to leverage off some of the work that we've done. In this case, like making sure that when we say, hey, this is timely, is like it is super timely. So it's something like Calendly, where it really matters. If Calendly sends you a reminder that a meeting's coming up at 9:05 a.m. and the meeting's at 9, like that's not going to feel great. But I really would like that notification to come just a few minutes before, right? And so that timing can really, really matter. And it's worth identifying that. Like, what are your current needs about how close in time, how close in space, right, your stuff is localized going out to users.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we're gonna spend a little time after this. We're gonna put up a blog post or something that's like, the notification receiver's bill of rights or whatever it is. I don't know if I'll have quite that goofy a name for it. I promise to come up with something better. And
maybe principles of notification trust or something like that.
Yes,
I don't know.
Yes, I love that. It sounds less. It sounds like less like angry Twitter user than your version. I like it. But Shreya, what else were we supposed to cover? I haven't been looking at the notes as closely as I could. Shreya.
I think we covered a lot of it. One of the points that we discussed in like the meeting earlier this week was how there's notifications that also impact kids and like working with minors, and that can be like a whole different thing with like the Lego Super Mario case study and everything. So that's
this was this thing. I'm probably not going to share the article, but yeah, it was like where a toy was essentially like got an update and started like saying little ads to go buy the expansion kit for it.
Yeah.
And I, I've seen other cases of this where like apps for kids or various other things where it's like, as a parent, very often you're like, God, I really wish you wouldn't do this. Right. there's been some like top level controls of this, but sometimes it is a little frustrating that the same things that maybe kind of stress us out are like stressing our own kids out. It's like, no, this doesn't feel great. Yeah,
I feel like the
breaking
ethics
some
of
that
it is
trust.
that yeah, even if there aren't any rules against it, just think about what you're doing,
Yeah,
um,
and
before
it
stepping
also
in.
goes to this question of audiences, where you know, obviously, if you have a chance that like minors are going to be part of your user base, right? Like, if you don't have audiences and you don't have ability to target, like that's going to be rough, right? Because you're going to send some stuff that just does not feel right. No parent is going to enjoy that you're asking a kid for their credit card number to expand to ultra premium pro service or something.
Exactly. And I honestly feel like that is just really insensitive too, because you never know what sort of like economic state that family is in.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that child got that toy as a gift and their parents couldn't afford to buy them this toy. And
Yeah.
now there's an immense amount of guilt because like now your child wants this other toy that you can't afford to buy, and it's because they were falsely advertised something that they shouldn't have been advertised. Like it's not. I just don't think that that's acceptable.
Yeah, I absolutely feel that like we're really, you really do have stuff out there that like absolutely violates trust. And in fact, like, we can even talk about how for a lot of people their relationship to things like apps on their mobile devices and stuff is very different than it was a few years ago, right? It's significantly less trusting and less like, oh, I'm eager to try this out, because they associate every new thing with like some stream of notifications that they didn't want and all this stuff. And that feels rough. For us, where we're trying to work with other B2B SaaS people, usually it's not like that people absolutely hate this. It's just like, yeah, we want this to be a little better and a little better targeted, right? And feel a little more timely.
I do want to add, and this might be like a better conversation for another day with like an expert maybe on board as well. But it's so interesting because for us, we didn't grow up with things like iPads and now we have it. So it's kind of like an external device that we use. We know that these messages are being sent aren't necessarily just for us, right? Someone's like a mastermind of notifications behind it. But with these kids, they're growing up with an iPad in their hand from like a very young age. And like that's such an interesting concept to me that they're probably getting notifications, right? Like what are they seeing? How is that impacting their relationship with notifications, but also just like devices and things in general?
Yeah, as somebody who works with this technology all the time and works with social media and stuff, like my oldest kid is completely cut off from all this. I'm like, you're not allowed to, you're like, your device is not connected to the internet and stuff. But then I came to a weird problem, which is as I started to let him watch like YouTube in a very supervised way, he was a lot less savvy than some of the other kids his age. Like the other 10-year-olds really got it. He was like, no, I want to try this thing that I saw working in Minecraft in this video. And I was like, that's modded Minecraft. They didn't tell you that, but that's the case. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure that's real. I was so glad we were able to have all these experiences in Minecraft and not about, politics. Right? Like, I'm glad that was what he got lied to about. Got to learn that like people, do these things that are not real for notoriety on YouTube. But yeah. All right, what else do we want to tell people about? We'll be back every week doing some fun thing. We're gonna book a guest for next week. Haven't done it yet, but I promise I'll reply to my emails at some point. We'll be back talking about automations, calling automations probably next week. That's gonna be fun. V, do you have cool Twitter stuff you want to share with people? Do you have a Spotify track you want to recommend?
I always recommend Lo-Fi, the one with the person that has the headphones on and it's like green and red. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about at this point, but it's like a really good lo-fi, like hip hop, like Spotify playlist. So I recommend that.
Wow. the most undifferentiated of genres, but I love it. It is good. There's nothing wrong with it.
It's good to go to.
DIY punk track. Parents Are Still a Handful by the band Big Kids. They're out of like Dallas, I think, or some wild spot that's like not Denton, I think. But anyway, Parents Are Still a Handful by Big Kids. Extremely good DIY punk. We'll not share the link in the show notes because I'm sure it's not appropriate to share at work. Shreya, other stuff that you want people to check out?
Honestly, we're constantly putting out really awesome content that's like not Courier specific, but just in general about technology, about notifications. So you should check out our blog if you haven't already. And yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
we had some
really,
great security stuff going on our blog. That will be in the show notes. And then also hacking the engineering process. Some very cool stuff with the high touch people that's going on video this week.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I did
that-
a thing.
What'd
I
you
forgot
do?
to mention. I did an interview about what it was like to be a customer to what it's like to now be an engineer. So check that out too. It's on our LinkedIn. And comment.
Yeah, that's the code
yeah.
story interview, right?
Yeah, it's a code story interview.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
that is
really
so
nice.
cool. All right, folks, thank you so much. We will be back next week. This was a fun one. Check us out every week and do again app.courier.com/sign up. Go and get a demo. If you sign up for Courier and you message me about it, I will definitely get you some swag. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon.